Hey, welcome back to Drawing with Dorwin. Today we're going to be drawing spheres and we're going to be shading them. Spheres are really pretty easy to draw. They're just a circle, and really all of what you do is shading that creates that three-dimensionality. That makes it look like a sphere. You could create a sphere inside of a box, but to be honest with you, you really don't need to. So this is where we're deviating from that one-point perspective kind of thing. So if you look right here, you'll notice that here is a sphere that's been shaded. Again, look, there's the highlight. It's lighter in this area and it begins to get shadowed. You'll notice there is the core of the shadow. There's some reflected light, and then there's the cast shadow. These are the things you're going to be looking for. We're going to draw three different ways today. We are going to draw using pointilism. We're going to draw with straight pencil, and then we're also going to use the smudging technique. So three techniques today. The circles we're going to do are going to be fairly big, so we have the ability to have some room to shade. Now, to draw a circle, you can use lots of things. You can use a compass, you could use a can, you could use a roll of tape, you could use a bottle. You know, anything that's round that you could trace around to give you your round shape. For us, we want to go fairly big, so I'm probably going to use my tape. Sounds pretty easy, right? The hard part is shading and getting the tones. We want it to be nice and subtle like it is on this one, but we want to make sure that we have enough tones, that we don't go super dark and only have one tone. All right, guys, let's get started. Let's get started drawing. Now you could use something like a roll of tape, either the inside or the outside. We don't really have to worry about our horizon line in this particular case, but I want my circles to be pretty good size. So I'm going to trace around 3 circles. 1, 2. Then I'm going to have one slightly overlapping. Why? Because it's more interesting to look at. So now it looks like this one is behind this one. Alright, so we're going to use 3 different techniques to shade here. We're going to use straight up pencil. We could use pencil with smudge, that would be fine. Or you could also use charcoal. This might be a good time for you guys to experiment with a little bit of charcoal. And then the last one is going to be using stippling or pointilism. This could potentially take some time, so make sure that you take your time on this. And I want to see 4 to 5 tones. I'm going to put my name on it. And the hour, today I'm teaching 6th and 7th hour, so I'm just going to put 6th hour for first. And the date, usually, today is February 2nd, Groundhog's Day, 21. Now, we've determined where our light source is. I feel like my light source should be up over here, so I'm just going to draw a quick little sun, just to represent where that light source is going to be. And so where we see the light source, we're going to see a shine mark. That's going to be our light area. Everything else is going to be shaded. It's going to throw a shadow, and I drew my light source over here specifically so that it wouldn't throw a shadow over the top of this curve, but it could. You might see a little bit of a shadow that would overlap, say like right there. And then a shadow is just usually comes off this circle in his flat or oblong circle. All right. Use that word a lot. I need to work on not using that word. Okay. So I'm just laying in my shadows really quickly. If I choose to use another media, I could get up and change that. Probably you could do with charcoal, you could do both the stippling, and stippling is using the dots. So that's going to take a long time either way that you do it. Pencils are easier to do it, that would be my suggestion, but you do you. All three techniques could be done just in pencil if you were feeling like you didn't want to switch. I would suggest that you're careful and you watch your hands, because something that you don't intend to smudge will easily smudge. Graphite, once you start getting thick layers, quickly makes a mess, or can make a mess. So we're going to come in here, we're going to use rounded lines to suggest the curve, and we're going to lay in a little tone. Lay down your pencil so you can get a nice soft tone using rounded lines. Start laying in our tones. You'll notice some of my lines are somewhat straight, but as long as you have quite a bit of curves, it helps suggest the roundness, and so does the shadowing. Now, if you're blending, if I choose this to be my smudge, this is where I could take in, now that I've got a fairly good layer, and I could smudge this to kind of fill in those areas. Still having a little bit of pencil line, which is cool because it creates a nice texture, but also this is going to be the easiest technique. The hardest part of this technique is keeping your shine mark white, because it's going to want to get colored in by your finger. So I'm going to lay a little bit of a layer in here and smudge it. If you get too dark on a layer, like right here, maybe it's too dark, if you're careful, you can take an eraser and you can carefully, notice I'm using rounded strokes, but I can pull off some of my smudging and then clean off your area. See, I feel like the bottom of this needs to be a little bit, we're going to ground this shadow. I'm not a huge fan with graphite of smudging. Not a huge fan of smudging in general, to be honest with you, because I don't personally like the mess all over my hands. I'm not afraid of it or anything, but it's just not my thing. All right, so you can see I've got a pretty decent shadow going here. You could smudge those tones like I said, be prepared. Another thing you could use is you could use a blending stump. You could smudge with a blending stump. All right. So I'm going to come in, start putting in dark tones where I want the dark tones. So a sphere acts differently in that it is very reflective of the light and it bounces the shadow around. So you might have an actual shadow and then you have the reflection of the shadow back on the object. And again, it depends on what it's made of. But basically, if you make a shadow that's crescent moon shaped, that will really help sell this. And then blending it. So this is layering. So even when I'm blending it, I have to go back in and darken the surface. Especially if you're blending that tone out to the other tones. But even doing this, you're gonna end up having to come in here and lay some tone in. You're not gonna have enough pencil to completely do this without. Now the very edge you're gonna leave lighter because it's, again, the light is bouncing off and back onto the table or back onto the ball. So you might have a little ring of lighter at the very edge. So I'm using my pencil to bring close. And I use a lot of different lines. Sometimes I use circles, small circles. Sometimes I use straight lines. Sometimes I use curved lines. You'll get a feel for it. A lot of it is experimenting and working it and figuring it out and not being afraid. I think the thing that students tend to not do is they tend to not bother to make a lot of tones. They're afraid to go too dark, or sometimes it's the opposite. Students go so dark that you can't see a transition. You couldn't tell one tone from another, and it takes a little bit of practice and it takes a little time. You just come in, sometimes taking a break from it and looking back, saying, what does it need? What is it missing? Okay, my shadow on this one is there we go. Smudging also denotes a different kind of texture surface. So some artists might choose to smudge because they want the surface of the object to look a certain way. I really like the smooth pencil line, and I like the fact that I can transition between different tones pretty quickly with pencil line. A lot of it, okay, see what I was talking about with the graphite on your fingers? So have some paper towel ready for yourself and make sure you're not smudging too much. This is where you have to take care of your art, so it's coming back and cleaning up things, taking the paper, shaking it off, get that stuff removed as best you can. Take a step back, look at the item. So our edge is dark because we have a cast shadow over the top. All right, I'm thinking this one is pretty good. Now, there should be a little more transition, but you know there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've met the requirement of having at least 4. 5 is better. More is better. More is always better because it becomes more and more realistic looking. So taking your time, not rushing through the art. Sharpen your pencil when you need to. And this is where you can go in with your eraser and actually lighten it up by putting some little eraser lines in it. And that'll pull back just slightly. And those lines, even though you can't see them all that well, actually do help suggest texture, and also it helps suggest the curvedness. So I oftentimes use a very curved line when I come back in with an eraser. All right, I think that's pretty good for this one. Now, we'll go with straight pencil on this one. I'm going to go wash my hands real quick. I'll be right back. So this is an example of a blending stump I was talking about, and this is a homemade version. You'll often see the big white, they almost look like pencils, but they're twisted at one end. So this serves the same purpose. It basically helps you burnish the paper and push the charcoal, or in this case pencil, into it. Helps blend from one tone to the next. And it makes your artwork just a little more subtle. Again, it depends on what you're going for. In the case of my art students, you guys are practicing different techniques today. So, I grabbed a cloth to be able to wipe my hands, but I'm going to be done with the messiest part. You can also use a regular eraser, it works fine, especially if your eraser starts getting too dirty. So very lightly where my reflection is going to be. Do you notice that the reflection is roughly in the same spot because these spheres are so close together? So much like we shaded this one, we're going to do this one, except without any blending. Well, without any blending with your hand. So I'm going to come in and lay a light tone. Using curved lines. Basically, the whole thing is going to have tone. And to make this shadow a little more convincing, we'll bring it down over here so it looks like it's attached, could have been attached. On the shadows, we're using straight lines because straight lines help suggest or sell the fact that the shadow is flat. Come here with my eraser, erase out the part I don't want anymore. And it could be, you know, I think I'm going to make this a shorter circle. I think it'll look more. So I'm actually going to come in here and take out this. If you've done it light enough, you can take it out pretty cleanly. If not, sometimes in art you have to start over. There we go. I think that's better. All right, so that shadow's in place. Go back to working on my circle. You can move the paper. It's not glued down. I think that's another mistake my students often make, is that they don't realize or they don't bother to move their paper at all. And it does help. Sometimes it's really hard to turn your wrist in a particular direction. As it goes down on the ball or the sphere, the strokes will get longer and wider. So we've laid in a very, very light tone. It's very sketchy and scratchy looking, and that's okay. If we want to, we can go back in and kind of clean up our highlight. This might be better where you have a fine eraser. Okay, so now I'm gonna come in and start laying in a much finer tone, very, very lightly on my pencil. Classes are starting to change in my school building, so it's great that we can be back in person. I don't know what time it is. 8:30, so I still have another hour. We're blessed in our school in that we have 2-hour blocks in art. I haven't adjusted to that because I've been used to predominantly teaching 1-hour blocks. I don't really have a problem with drawing 2 hours personally, but I know some of my students are not used to putting in long hours. And I try to tell them that when they get to college, or hopefully they get to college, that they're going to see more and more of that. All right, just like we've got a lighter tone down here, down in here, we're going to have lighter here. So I'm going to start laying in my darker tone a little bit. So it's coming over and purposely laying that shadow that we saw. And I'm just going to do it lightly at first, and bring the tone out. And you'll notice that sometimes your paper picks up little things from other pieces or indents. If you have paper, or if you have eraser underneath little chunks, you can get little dimples like that. That's all right. It's part of the charm. Using short, curved lines. Now I'm laying in my darker tone, and I'm going to use that to blend to the next tone. Trying to get a subtle transition. Again, we can go through with an eraser and pull that back out and make it lighter if we can. So you can see it's very striated at the moment. That's okay. We'll get there. A lot of drawing is patience. It really does take time to get to the best kind of art. You would not believe the amount of time that artists put into artwork. You start to understand, at least as an adult, you start to understand the number of hours that they may put into a piece, and it starts you to understand why they charge what they charge. Even at 10 bucks an hour sometimes, if I use it as my base for my drawing and I've got 100 hours into it, that's $1,000 drawing. That's not counting the cost of the materials or anything else. So, all right. Now I'm going to do some cross hatching here. So I'm going in the opposite direction a little bit, very lightly, just trying to use curved lines again, just to help kind of not only create additional texture, but also to just suggest more of the shape in an opposite direction. All right, we're starting to get some shape. Where we're going to lose a lot is because we have this underneath, and it's going to be harder to replicate that because there's a big piece of it missing. So sometimes, you know, you're like, oh, great, now I don't have to draw as much. Well, but you have to be able to figure out where would that come from, what would that look like. So a lot of it is literally going back over the top of lines that you've already drawn, and lightly, you're putting down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of layers. That's what makes it look more realistic and looks more interesting. More dynamic. So for my students, the next big project we're going to do is we've learned to shade each of the objects to create form. We've learned shading on basic objects, as you're going to take and create your own masterwork using 5 items. Well, actually I haven't determined that yet, but I'm thinking in my head 5 items, and you're going to shade them. But they can be, say you're you love oranges. You know, you might make one an orange. You might choose for your box, maybe you're a huge cereal fan, and you know, every morning part of your routine is to eat cornflakes or frosted flakes or something like that. Then you might choose that as your box. So then you'd be responsible for drawing that. Maybe you know, for your cylinder, you're in love with hats. Just saying, you know, there are lots of different things that you could do. Okay, this might be where I need to slightly pull some tone back, so I'm using my eraser, very carefully pulling the tone back, trying to blend it from one to the other. All right, I know it's kind of boring when I don't talk, or maybe it's not, I don't know. But that's looking pretty good for a demonstration piece. I could literally spend hours drawing more. Right now we're at 33 minutes and I still have one more to shade, and that's going to be the stippling. The stippling is the hardest part, because the stippling is going to require you to have a pencil sharpener and a good pencil, and it's going to take time. You could also do this with colored pencil. You could do this with charcoal. Any of the pencil-like mediums would work fine for this. People do it with paint. So the idea is, the further apart your dots are when you fill them in an area, the lighter the item looks. So I'm going to erase that to very light, and so I might have only a few dots in this area to kind of suggest that, and then I'm going to start to kind of fill out realizing that you're going to have that crescent just like you did before. I could even come in and do my shadow using this technique. So if I take my shadow and erase out and make it light so we have room for the stippling. See, I use a much harder to get the darker, and they're close together. So where that shadow is touching the object, they interact, you're going to get a nice dark line. I think the main thing on this, it's going to require you to sharpen your pencil often, so you don't beat it till it's completely dull. When it's looking kind of dull, or it's feeling, or it's not laying down with the way you want, then you switch to, now you'll notice this particular pencil is not leaving a point, it's leaving almost a little ray, and that's okay. It's still considered pointilism. So now I'm lightening up my grip, and I'm trying to fill in where there are a ton of white space, but I'm also leaving a little bit to suggest a lighter gray tone. Also, the fact that I'm not smashing down as hard on the pencil. So if I really want it dark, I might come back in here and really, but the lighter is just going to create a lighter gray also. The nice thing about this, especially for doing for shadows, is it's nice and subtle, and it probably mimics what a real shadow does look like, because a shadow, well, it depends on the surface, but our shadow tends to blend out and become almost non-distinct at the edges. We tend to look at it as a sharp line, but we don't tend to look that closely. If we really take our time and look at an object, we start to see things and things that we missed. I think that's the one thing I learned from a lot of drawing courses over my lifetime, is that we never really, artists help us look at objects in ways we don't look at them. So an artist spends hours staring at an object as they draw it and shade it. And so we see the fine detail that we normally would have missed. All right, I'm going to turn my artwork over. I'm going to lay in kind of that crescent shape. It's kind of cool because it's different. It makes a texture. I did a drawing in high school just like, actually I did a triceratops. So notice too, I'm laying my pencil down so I get a bigger mark. If you do straight up and down, you get much smaller marks, which is great for very, very fine. But it will take you a lot longer. So that's another tip for doing it, is laying down the pencil makes a bigger mark. It also doesn't, you'll notice it doesn't quite make a dot, but that's, like I said, that's okay. So I'm working on putting in this crescent shape. It's okay to turn the paper. Different textures can be achieved by different techniques. So an artist might employ multiple techniques in a single drawing, depending on what the surface is made of the object. You know, if you wanted an object to be very wooden looking, or now the media I used was all the same, but the techniques were each different. Rotating also, because I'm not making little circles, I'm actually almost, they look like little dashes. It helps blend those so it's not I know I trailed off there. I don't know where I was going. It's all right. So this technique is the one that's going to take you some time, not only to master, but time just to employ. This is not a rush technique. It's going to take some time. The cool thing is you could do a lot of really neat textures with it. Like if I were doing a tree, for example, especially like a conifer tree, like a pine tree, I think you could get a very convincing texture for your tree using this technique. I'm holding the pencil pretty loosely between my fingers. I'm holding it not like we normally hold a pencil to write. If I want a more controlled, like I had around the circle, I can switch it back to that mode. And again, I'm just using little dots. It's okay to move around the picture, make different areas. Lighter pressure when you're making the dots makes lighter dots. So one thing students try to do is they try to do as quick as they can. You can't do that with this technique. It just doesn't work. I mean, some people are faster than others, granted, but I think the other thing is don't rush your artwork. Right? I've said that before, and I'll say it again and again and again and again. Don't rush it. The idea is to make quality work and to get better. I'm showing you techniques. I'm showing you, I'm giving you different practices to help you build a skill. The reason that we've done this before we've done our second project here is because I wanted to build a skill base so that you had a toolbox to choose from and pull some things out. This would make a very convincing orange texture as well, because oranges, when you look at them very closely, have little dots. So if I were doing this with an orange colored pencil, I could create a very convincing surface for an orange. In fact, what I'd probably do is I'd probably take and turn this yellow, and I'd probably shade it like I did this one, and then I'd come over the top with stippling, and I would stipple in orange over the top of the yellow because it's semi-transparent. All objects are a little bit translucent, so a little bit of light goes through it like our skin. We're actually seeing multiple layers underneath. You're seeing the red from your blood veins, the blue from your red from your, let's see, it's veins, and it doesn't matter. I'm not obviously a science teacher, I'm an art teacher, but you have red and blue veins and arteries and veins, and the red arteries have a reddish hue, the blue veins have a bluish hue, the layers of muscles, you're seeing a little bit of that color all the way through. Your skin's not transparent. Nobody's skin is transparent, but, well, most nobody's skin is transparent. But you get a little bit of the color bleed through. That's why you see different variations in the hand. You can see right here where this vein is closer to the surface is a bluer color. So a little digression, but you know. So I am coming up on 46 minutes. I know that's a long time for drawing, at least for following somebody along. I am going to go ahead and stop this video. You would continue in the same vein all the way across. There really shouldn't be too much white, maybe that one shine mark, and if you need to come in, maybe you got your dots too dark, carefully lighten them up. You have to be careful though, because it'll start to blend it. All right. That's what I have for you today. I will try to finish this up and get this video posted online for you guys. I hope you have a wonderful, great day. Life is good. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The more stuff that you do interact with the channel, the better it is. The more people get to see it. So thanks, and take care.